Okay, so welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar hosted by the Organization Development and Change and Workforce Education and Development Program at Penn State. This is a monthly webinar series presented during our lunch hour. My name is Isal Belushi. I'm a PhD holder in the Workforce Education and Development Program at Penn State University. I will be moderating today's webinar along with my colleague, Jose Sandoval, who's also a PhD candidate in Learning Design Technology Program at Penn State. In terms of interactive format of this webinar, please use the chat feature on the Zoom platform. If you have any questions about the presentation, please use chat feature on Zoom. You can see the chat button at the bottom of the screen. The Q&A session will be at the end of the presentation. Our online Master of Professional Studies in Organization Development and Change are designed for professionals like you who need the skills and knowledge to effectively lead change in their organizations. Furthermore, there is a Master and PhD programs in Workforce Education and Development with a concentration in Human Resource Development and Organization Development. Our program has created a continuous monthly free webinars series with experts around the world. Today, we are presenting Learning to SOAR, the power of our questions make all the difference, presented by Dr. Jackie Stavros. Dr. Stavros is a professor and management consultant in the College of Business and Information Technology at Lawrence Technological University. She is faculty athletics representative at LTU, where she enjoys working with athletes to empower them to navigate and advocate for themselves. She inspires them with life work, not homework. She has co-authored many articles and books. Her research is grounded in AI, neuroscience, and positive psychology to help others understand how their conversations influence their well-being and ability to succeed. She is on a mission to create a global movement on conversation with having to recognize each other community and create organization and community that work for everyone. For more information about Dr. Stavros' bio, please visit today's webinar page on our website on Eventbrite. Now, without further ado, please join me in welcoming our speaker today. Dr. Stavros, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Well, I want to thank everybody for coming on a Friday afternoon in the springtime. It shows how invested you are in your learning. And we're going to learn to SOAR today. Many of you, if you're a doctoral student, SOAR came out of my dissertation. And so for those of you working on your master's and your graduate degrees, it's a pivotal moment in life, and it's what you do afterwards that really begins to count. So you'll see in the chat, there's like a workbook. If you click on that way you don't have to take copious notes. It's the Learning to SOAR booklet, and everything I talk about is in this booklet here. So we're going to get started. And the first thing I want you to think about is Brian Tracy, who is a management trainer, says 85% of your success depends on how you communicate. And so communication is key. It impacts everyone and everything. And the one of the former CEOs of LinkedIn, Jeff Weiner, said the boot camp of the future is one that teaches you how to ask questions and have conversations. So I like to say the future has arrived. So I'd like you to think about the power of your questions. Have you ever thought about how the questions you ask influence yourself and other? And the way you ask a question can put people into a protect mode or a connect mode with you. And your questions can either make someone fall below the line, be depreciative and sink, or they can help people soar. So if you learn how to ask the right questions, it begins to make the invisible visible. It creates a shared understanding between you and the people that you're in a conversation with. It generates new knowledge, new ideas, new information, and it really begins to inspire possibilities. So for this presentation, I have 4 questions we're going to get through, or you can look at the questions as objectives. So we're going to quickly go into, is there such a thing as asking a right question? What is the humanistic AI? What is the power of generativity in your questions? And how can your questions help you and others to soar? So if you're following along and you were able to download the Learning to Guide booklet, that information is on page 2. So you'll see sometimes in the bottom left of your slides is where I am in the workbook. So what is the right question? I did some research there and I looked up questions. I simply went back to the dictionary, and questions are the act of being curious and inquiring about someone, something, or someplace. And then right is being accurate with what is good, what is valued, what is genuine. So there is such a thing as a right question, and it's a type of inquiry that focuses on what is good, what is favorable, what is desirable, or of value to you. And I'm going to show you how this works. That you can ask questions that help people get above the line, or you could ask questions that push people below the line. And when you're pushing people below the line, it can be toxic, it can be a closed mind, it can be very, very unhealthy. So I know I can't see you, but I want you to just close your eyes for a moment and recall a conversation where the tone was depreciative or the statements were critical or negative. I want you to locate that. And my question to you is, if you could type in the chat, I believe you can type in the chat, when you think of that negative, critical, or destructive conversation, how does that feel in your body? So I'm hoping they have access to the chat. And I'd just like you to type in the chat for a moment. When you're in that negative, depreciative place, how does that question make you feel? Jose, can they type in the chat here?
Yes,
Okay,
they are typing in the chat, and hosts and panelists.
Okay, so most of the times when you're in a negative conversation, you feel tense. If you had a smartwatch on, your heart rate is going up. It doesn't feel good. So these kind of conversations are really bad for you and really bad for the people that you're in the conversation with. And what this happens to do is the neuroscience of communication and the neuroscience of leadership is negative conversations and questions put people into a protect mode. And everything is there. The ego, it can't tell the difference between positive and negative, but they're in this protect mode, and all the bad chemicals are in your body and everything is going to one place. So you can't access critical thinking, and you usually want to fight, freeze, or flee or appease people. And so I would ask you to just stretch your hands high. And if you put your hands behind your head for a moment to the reptilian part of your brain, you're in that protect mode. Look at where your thumbs are. Your thumbs are pointing down, and that's not a good place to be in. So I want you to now think about a great conversation. I want you to think about a great conversation where people were asking questions, they were curious, the statements were above the line, and think for a moment in that appreciative space. How does that feel in your body? How does an appreciative, above the line conversation feel in your body? And what this begins to do is when you ask questions from an appreciative space, you're in a connect mode. You're talking about the chemical cocktail that's going through your nervous system and through the brain is healthy hormones. And if you were to put your hands in the front of your head, on the front of your head, this is the frontal lobe. This is the executive function of the brain. I want you to look where your thumbs are. Your thumbs are up. And this is a place that we need to be in when we're asking questions. If we want people to learn and grow and understand, we've got to be working from the prefrontal lobe, which is actually also called the executive function of the brain. And when you're in this space, it's healthy, it's vibrant, people can grow, people can access critical thinking, they can access creativity, and they can move forward. So this first question is really about how do you operate from above the line? How everybody can see or hear conversations you're having with each other. But what you don't know is what's below the line. So some of the things I don't know, because I've just met you, is what your beliefs are, what your expectations. Maybe you didn't get enough sleep, or you haven't drank enough water today, or you had a negative experience. So it's really important to operate from above this line. In the neuroscience, if you continue thinking about the neuroscience of how this works, is you can choose your mindset. You can be in control of your conversations and the questions you ask. And there's this thing in the brain behind the frontal lobe called the amygdala part of your brain. And we've talked about the amygdala hijack. And in about a quarter of a second, you're going to act either negatively or positively based on how the person asked you a question. So between that stimulus and response, there's space. And the neuroscience shows us that we have the power to choose our responses and grow. So I'm going to show you a quick 3-minute video by the Conscious Leadership Group. And I recommend, this is a great video that I use all the time in training, but you have to be able to locate and ask yourself, where am I? So let's take a look at this.
One question that conscious leaders ask themselves over and over is, where am I? To support leaders in locating themselves as they ask the question, where am I? We offer this tool, a line, a simple black line. At any moment, all leaders and all people are either above the line or below the line. Our location describes how we're being with what is occurring in our life right now. If we're above the line, we are open, curious, and committed to learning. If we are below the line, we are closed, defensive, and committed to being right. Stop right now and simply ask yourself, where am I? In this now moment, am I above the line or below the line? Typically, when people are below the line, they believe certain things about the world. For example, they believe there is not enough. It could be that there's not enough money, or time, or space, or energy, or love. People below the line also believe that their story about the situation is right. People below the line also believe that there is a threat out there. Something or someone is threatening their desire for approval, control, or security. And people below the line see the situation as serious. The deeper below the line they are, the more serious things look. People below the line tend to behave certain ways as well. They tend to cling to an opinion, find fault and blame, gossip, explain, rationalize and justify, get overwhelmed, and avoid conflict or pursue conflict for the sake of winning. When people are above the line, they believe that learning and growing are more important than being right. They believe that all people and circumstances are their allies, here for their growth. They believe that from a distance, almost everything is funny. People above the line live in curiosity, listen deeply, speak unarguably, question all their beliefs, and live a life of play. Now, knowing what you know about being above or below the line, where are you? One thing to know as you consider this question. We are hardwired to go below the line. Literally, our brain is programmed to perceive threat, and when it does, a chemical cocktail courses through our veins, and we go below the line. This reaction was designed to help us survive in the presence of a real threat to our physical survival. An issue for modern-day leaders is that often our brains can't tell the difference between a threat to our physical survival and a threat to our ego or identity. We react and get defensive when we experience a threat to our ego. So in many ways, being below the line is natural and normal. But when we are below the line, we're not in a state, literally brain state, of high creativity, collaboration, innovation, and relational connection. We're simply trying to survive. Leaders today can't thrive if they're in survival mode. So the first activity of conscious leadership is location, location, location. In this now moment, where am I? Telling ourselves and others the truth about our current location begins the great conversation.
Okay. So I want you to just think for a moment that we are hardwired to go below the line, and we're also hardwired to go above the line. And a practice that we've identified in research is that the importance of learning to tune in. And when you tune in, you can tune in by just learning to practice. How is it that you can just say pause? When you say pause, pausing actually resets the chemical cocktail in your body in a place of peace, a place of well-being. Your heart rate gets back to normal, especially if you've been below the line. When you breathe, you actually reset the neural system into your body. And so that just by pausing and breathing, if you're below the line, you can get back into the line and above the line. And it's really important to get curious and be curious. So these are just one practice that I want you to practice doing quite a bit, is just tuning in and being curious. And there's many reasons why you can go below the line, but the pausing and breathing will bring you back up to the line. So the other thing I want you to think about is just learning to tune in more and be self-aware. Where are you when you're entering a conversation, or when somebody has spoken to you? When you feel yourself going below that line, just pausing, breathing, and getting curious and asking really good questions. So the next thing I want to talk about is appreciative inquiry. So appreciative inquiry is the other AI, the humanistic AI. And appreciative inquiry is about how do we live into the world and create questions. So the appreciative inquiry got its start with the Cleveland Clinic at Case Western Reserve University back in 1985. And David Cooperrider, when I joined Case in 1995 as a doctorate student, David was one of my instructors as well as my dissertation chair. And what I learned about appreciative inquiry as I studied it in organizational life is to study what gives life to living systems when they're most alive. And organizations are just that. They're living systems with people in them. So appreciative inquiry is an intentional discovery of the best in people, organizations, and communities. And it's about asking questions into the best of what was, what is, and what could be. Many people in the org development world are very familiar with the 5Ds, the 5D cycle. It's a methodology that you can use to orchestrate a conversation and bring people through a conversation, invite them to define what is it they want to study, what do they want to discover more about, dream, design, and deliver on. And it's grounded in the notion that we co-create each moment through the way we are asking questions and how we're asking questions. I like to break things down always by the dictionary, but if you looked up appreciative in the dictionary, it's about adding value and being of value. And the word inquiry is asking questions, being curious, wondering, and searching. So appreciative inquiry is truly a way of being. When I learned about appreciative inquiry, it was just a qualitative research technique back in the late 90s. And from that, it became so much more with the creation of the 5D cycle. So this is David Cooperrider. And, David Cooperrider believes that you can fuel productive and meaningful engagement that creates conversations worth having, and as a leader, have a positive legacy. And this is one of my other favorite quotes, is he says, our lives and the lives of others flourish or flounder one conversation at a time. So questions and appreciative inquiry is a way of asking questions. Back in when David did his dissertation, these were the 5 principles that came out of his research, that our words create our world. So think about it. When you're asking a question, the moment you ask that question, you're impacting someone's ability to either flourish or flounder, and it impacts their well-being. And the poetic principle says you have a choice in how you ask a question, and you can study anything you want. I can study moments of stress and what's stressing you out, or I could study moments of flourishing and how do I get you to learn and have that growth mindset. The anticipatory principle that came out from his research is what we see, we expect to see. So it's being able to anticipate and think forward of what you want more of. And then The positive principle is all about positive images and positive action. And there's a lot of research from the Center for Positive Organizations, the positive psychology field. So there's a lot of science behind positive images, positive actions equate to positive results. And if you use the other AI and you were to Google appreciative inquiry, within a split second, you would actually find 6.3 million answers about what is appreciative inquiry. And so I encourage you, if you've never heard about appreciative inquiry, to go out and explore it. You know, most people in the organization development space do know what appreciative inquiry is, and they're most familiar with the 5D cycle. Now, appreciative inquiry started as a research technique in 1985, and then in about the early 90s, about 1995, it was the principles that were important. The 5D method didn't come into being until about 1998. And if you looked at an organization development handbook back in the late 1990s, appreciative inquiry was about a paragraph in the back in like the last chapter of what it was. Today, you see appreciative inquiry threaded through a lot of the organization development textbooks, which now brings me to what I would call is our third question. And it's a question: what is a generative question? And I heard that in January, if you were at one of these events, that Jervis Bush came to speak to you. And he wrote an article called Appreciative Inquiry is Not Just About the Positive. And I recommend that. It's one of my favorite articles. And he talked about generative and generative inquiry. And generative means that it widens our view by changing the way people think. And generativity is where we can have stimulating, compelling images for people to act on. So this brings me to the third question: what is the power of generativity in the way we ask questions? So let's think about this. There's about 4 different types of conversations that you could be having with people. And generative questions are questions that you can ask yourself and ask others. What I want you to think about is how much of your awake hours are spent in conversations with yourself, in conversations with others. Think about that. How much time when you are awake are you spending in conversations with others, in conversations with self? So if you could just type that in the chat, what percentage of your awake hours are you in conversations? It could be on social media where you're talking to people. It could be in your minds, but how much of your waking hours are you in conversations with another? 85. Okay, I found out how I can look at the chat. 75. I think a lot more of the time in conversations with myself, always analyzing, yes, talking to yourself. Jenna, all of it. Yeah, we spend a lot of time. Conversations are the heart. Leslie, I've never had anybody say 50%, but that's pretty good if you're only in conversations with yourself and others half of your awake hours. You've got some really good thinking time. So conversations are the heart of how we interact. So let me kind of break this down to you. Sherry Torres, my co-author, and I in Conversations Worth Having, we did some research here about the types of conversations that people are typically in. So if you draw that straight line that we talked about in the video, is imagine that above this purple line here is an appreciative space. This is the space where you want to be having conversations about 80% of the time. Below the purple line is the depreciative space. And these are where conversations are destructive or critical. So when you look above and below the line, the types of conversations you want to be in 80% of the time is affirmative of value, and conversations worth having are appreciative, inquiry-based, that you're asking questions. And so it's really important to live that life. Not, I didn't say 100% of the time, but about 80% of the time. And when you find yourself going below the line, remember this otter here. Tune in, pause, breathe, get curious, and ask yourself, where am I? Why am I below the line? How did I get there? Sometimes it's about the other person. An article that I read was the business case for curiosity. So Harvard Business Review had an entire issue devoted to that when we are curious, we naturally ask questions and we can view tough situations more creatively and have a less defensive reaction to stress. So if you go back to the neuroscience, that there is a right way to ask questions, think about how conversations impact your state of being. So that's what's really important here. So this third question is just, what is a generative question? So there are generative questions to shift a conversation that you can ask yourself. And the first one, based on the video clip we watched, was, where am I? Ask yourself, what's driving my reaction? Why am I falling below the line? You know, what's going on? What don't I know about the situation? I try to tell my students, every time you find yourself saying, I wonder what the professor thinks, or I wonder what my parents think, or I wonder what my coach thinks, ask. So what do I want to happen? What might be possible now? If you notice, appreciative and inquiry-based questions are asking what and how, and you don't know the answer to. So you're very curious about figuring out what's going on inside of me. So these are generative questions to shift the conversation that you might be having with yourself. And then there's generative questions that you can ask to shift others. You know, what's happening here? Asking people, how do you see it? How can I support you? What might be possible now? What is one small action that would make a difference? One of my favorite questions, and it's an Appreciative Inquiry original question, is, so what are your wishes? What do you want to see happen? So I could spend all day looking at situations and scenarios, but this one is about a person, a client, it could be a student, is always late for an appointment and never acknowledges it or apologizes. And this can begin to temper you. And your reaction might be judgment, blame, shame, anger, or annoyance. And maybe it's self-doubt. Does this person value me and our time because they're always late for our meetings? And sometimes your self-doubt gets in the way and you begin to question, am I effective enough? But instead of going below the line, a generative question would ask, where am I now? What are my feelings about the situation? Ask yourself, who chose this time? May there be a better mutually agreed upon time to meet? What don't you know of what they're doing before your standard meeting? What am I making up? We do make up a lot of stuff in our minds when we're talking. So if you could pause and breathe and get curious, generative questions are trying to get you to that space where assumptions are surfaced, you're inspiring possibilities, you're making a movement forward, you're building trust, you're getting new knowledge. And then there's questions you can ask the person who's always late to your meeting. Ask them, does this time work for you and for our sessions? And what happens either at work or in your thought process that you're always late to our standing meeting? What's going on the hour before that meeting? Might there be a better time or a better day of the week to meet? And what are you hoping for from our time together? So it's having that conversation versus being annoyed, self-doubting, or a relationship getting worse because the person is habitually late. So these are just questions to ask about typical scenarios. So the last place I want to take you before we open it up for questions and answers is I want you to think about how can you ask questions that help people soar, that help people with their strategic thinking, planning, and leading so they move forward. So SOAR is a profoundly positive approach to strategic thinking, planning, and leading. And if you look closely at SOAR here, you can see the A and the I within SOAR. Now, SOAR emerged 20 years ago from my dissertation. It was a capacity building framework, and none of you at this workshop would ever want to read a 300-page dissertation. What was really important is building this framework based on my findings to figure out, is there a way that we can engage in conversations in our communities and our workplaces where it promotes generativity, growth, and learning in organizations? So Appreciative Inquiry is the operating system of SOAR. Now, this small booklet came out, the first edition, 10 years after my dissertation. And SOAR is a profoundly positive approach to strategic thinking and planning that allows a group, organization, or community to construct its future through the way they're asking questions in the organizations. Jenna Henricks, my co-author, used used SOAR quite a bit in John Deere and the organization. So Jenna's been with me since the early days of SOAR, and she really gets this, lives this, and breathes this. So I was very fortunate to have her as a co-author in the first edition and also in the second edition. And when we wrote the second edition of this book, we realized that SOAR's original purpose was about strategy and strategic planning, that people were using it for strategic leading and team building, and there were all kinds of ways organizations were coming together to strategically move forward. So this next slide here is just a visual of the organizations around the world that have been using Appreciative Inquiry and SOAR as a way of connecting, as a way of creating innovations, as a way of doing whole system strategic planning. And these organizations understand that how we ask questions and interact with people begins to create the innovations and the sustainability. I don't have a logo up here, which is Visa Corporation, but Visa Corporation, if you talk to the founder, Dee Hock, he would say that Visa Corporation, and we all probably have a Visa credit card, was built one conversation at a time. He was a master of having conversations. So how SOAR begins to break down is that within organizations today, strengths configurations, what are we great at? Imagine sitting down with your team or your division or department and look at configurations of what are we best? When are we at our best? What's a high point experience? What are the strengths? And the strengths configuration is being able to hear the stories, not just from the senior leaders or the board, but SOAR would ask you to invite those people in the organization who are the closest to their customers, the closest to your customers, and what do they see as the strengths? And they would also ask you to engage in conversations with your customers and suppliers and people in the community as to what do they think are the strengths of the organizations. So the S starts with a strengths configuration. The O is opportunity exploration. What are the possibilities and the ideas and the innovations? What is it that we could be doing that we haven't thought about? Or how do we take an existing product or service and improve on it? And let's talk to our customers. What do they think we should be doing? And who are some of our customers that we'd like to, or the markets we want to go into, and do an opportunity exploration? So what are the possibilities, ideas, and innovations? The next one is aspirations. What do our stakeholders care deeply about? We could have a conversation about what do our employees care about? What do our customers care about? What do our suppliers care about? What about the government that we interact with, depending on our organizations? But really get at the aspirations. So when you have a conversation based on strengths, opportunities, and aspirations, it allows you to come up with the strategic initiatives that you can focus on within your teams, within the division, within the organization, because we can't do everything. But if we can understand our aspirations, all the possibilities out there and the strengths, how do we begin to focus on key 5 to 7 initiatives, or the 3 to 5 initiatives that are going to help us get the results that we want? And talking about conversations is, what do we want to be known for? How do we know we are succeeding? So one of the things I want to point out about SOAR is it originally started as a strategic planning. It's dialogical. How do we ask questions to do strategy and strategic planning? What we've learned in the last 5 years is it's for strategic leading, strategic conversations. And you don't have to necessarily start with the S. You could have a conversation and start with aspirations and talk about opportunities and SOAR. So it's a very flexible framework to use to really focus on strategy and strategic planning in an order that you want to have the conversation. So there's no one way to SOAR. Another area that SOAR has been used for in the last 5 years is as a coaching framework. So imagine you're a coach, you're a mentor, you're a boss, talking to somebody you're coaching and simply asking them, what is going on for you? Get a clue, are they above or below the line? And asking them, what is it that they want to create? What would you like to create? What do you wish you could be doing? And ask them to tell you about this possibility, having them vision, what does this look like? And once you have that conversation with them, you could ask them, what are your strengths as they relate to this possibility? What opportunities do you want to go after in this situation? And asking the person, what do you aspire to create? What's your vision? And what are some actions and goals that you are willing to commit to? And what results would indicate you're making progress? And just coaching them through. The metaphor of SOAR is from the appreciative space. You're asking questions of value and then asking them, when you create this new possibility, what now becomes possible? What actions and awareness will you commit to? And what resources do you need? How can I support you? Or who are the people that can support you? So you're asking questions that are very generative in nature. And it's really pushing them to discover possibilities, purpose, and people's passion. So there is a right way to asking questions. And I want you to think about the next conversation you're going to engage in. What is the tone of your questions? Is it appreciative? Where are your questions taking you and others? Are they taking you above the line? Are you soaring with these? How do your questions make others feel? And maybe what is one small change or action that you might take today? We talked about tuning in. We talked about asking generative questions. We've talked about how you can use the SOAR framework, but think, what is one thing that you would try in the next 24 hours that would have you soaring? And the key to this is, this sounds easy because it's just one practice of tuning in, how you ask questions, but you've got to practice it so that it becomes natural. The more you practice, the better you get at this. And, you know, we are going to have those ain't it awful moments, those moments of frustration. But what I want you to remember, the next time you feel yourself below the line, pause, breathe, and get curious. So we're coming up on the 45 minutes before the close of the hour. So at this point, what I'm going to do is, I believe I'm going to take my slide deck down and we're going to open it up to answering any of your questions. So I'm going to stop sharing.
Okay, so I think we got a couple of questions so far, and still we encourage everyone, please, if you have questions that we can just direct it to Dr. Stavros, please put it in Q&A section or in chat.
Yeah, I'm
So the
looking,
first
I'm just
question was,
scrolling. Somebody said that's a great video. They liked the video. So if you just Google conscious leadership above the line, you can find that video there. It's so easy out there. There was a question.
yes, the first
How
question
long
that we
do you
got.
have to, Sheila asked, how long do you have to breathe to come back above the line? So Sheila, I had a colleague very frustrated on Wednesday at work, and she got to work, she had a presentation, and then she just broke down crying after that. I told her to pause, take a deep breath. I made her take like 3 deep breaths. And she finally was able to maintain her composure. And then I asked her if she wanted to go for a walk. She said that would be nice. So it's going to depend on the situation, but usually pausing, breathing, a couple of deep breaths can get you above the line, but sometimes you might need to go for a walk. It's going to really depend on how below the line you are. I'm just scrolling through the chat right now. Yeah, Rebecca says, I think a lot more of the time I'm in conversations with myself and analyzing and thinking. How do you think of questions through a culture lens in terms of appreciative inquiry? I don't know, we can't unmute people, can we? How do you think of questions through a cultural lens in terms of appreciative inquiry?
Yes, we can do that. Jose is working on that one.
Yeah, I would like Marcia ask that question if she could tell us what she means by that.
Can I? Thank you for the great presentation. What I'm curious of, in my culture, when we ask questions, general questions, we are very direct, right? We are not sugarcoating questions. So in terms of the appreciative inquiry, when you're in organization, is that something, the cultural aspect, is that something to be mindful of?
Yeah, so great question. So it's interesting. I was on a podcast this morning that was in California with doctors, because doctors ask a lot of yes and no questions versus exploratory questions to a patient. And we were talking about, just think of the tone of your voice. So your tone also, because 70% of communication is based on your nonverbal and your tone. So I could say, can you hear the tone of my voice? I need to talk to you. And I can be pushing you below the line. Or I could say, you know, can you hear the tone of my voice? We need to get together. I'm really excited. I need to talk to you. So think about the tone of your voice as well in your nonverbals. And appreciative and inquiry-based questions are exploratory. It wouldn't say, do you like the color blue or yellow? Or tell me, what color do you think we need to paint this wall so that it brings energy to the room? And why is it? So appreciative and inquiry-based questions are very exploratory. It's not an either or, and you don't know where the question's going to go. It's more of a dialogue. Does that help answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, let's see. Rebecca asked a question. What advice do you have for people lower on the org chart who are longing for these sorts of conversations, but are not seeing the AI tone from leaders who seem to be having more unilateral announcements to get people all on one page? Wow, that's a really good question. So Rebecca, I think of this as we're trying to, how do you manage up, especially if you are lower on the org chart? So I always think is if you and I are in a meeting, I might ask you, and the senior leader is I might say, I'm curious, can you tell me more about why you think this way or this direction? So if you can ask leaders more about what and how, and that you're curious, I think they're opening to answering questions. And you don't want to ask questions that are critical questions that would put them below the line. But even saying, you know, there's big dialogue. Employers want people in the office 5 days a week, and employees want to come to work maybe 2 or 3 days a week. And they're like, we know how to work at home. So you could ask a question to the employer demanding everybody get back into the office 5 days a week and say, can you share with me where this decision's coming from? And can we have a conversation about how do we best work remotely and how do we work best completely? And might we design a hybrid system? So you can ask questions out of curiosity to the senior leaders that actually puts you in a connect mode with them. Even when you said sometimes a unilateral announcement to get people on the page, is it an announcement that you can respond back to in a very thoughtful, appreciative way? Does that kind of help answer your question, Rebecca? Or would you like to unmute and give us some more context?
That was helpful. I appreciate it.
Yeah, in the way you ask a question, you know, I've been in a place where someone complains about, we spent all this money on this technology system and nobody's using it, and they start to generalize. And I usually would say, I said to the provost, I said, surely somebody's using it somewhere. There's got to be one department that really likes it. And the provost kind of sat tall and she says, you know, the College of Business is using this. Maybe we need to get people working more together. Why are they using this so much and how are they using this? Because you want to avoid people from generalizing and giving them a moment. So that's a great question, Rebecca. Monica said, how do we keep a curious tone to our questions when they begin to sound more interrogative? And I think I answered that is it's about your tone and how you ask a question that is open-ended. And you say, I'm really curious. Can you tell me how we came about this decision? Great. Can you tell me why we're moving in this direction and are we open? So curious questions are, you kind of lean in and it's not that you're putting down the decision. You're asking more about how did the decision come into being? And are they open to have a dialogue about this? And you also say, Monica, especially when we are asking someone else questions, to try to dig deeper to a root problem. I wanted to address that for a moment, a root problem. So I grew up, I thought I was going to be a mechanical engineer, and I didn't do well in Calc 3. And I worked with engineers all my life in product development and research and design. And what I realized is problem solving is good with mechanistic systems and digging deep. Why? What did this go wrong? How do we fix something? When you're dealing with people, with humans and emotions, generative questions is you're looking for, again, that curiosity. So I believe appreciative inquiry is best when we're dealing with human systems. And when we want to figure out, you know, how do we create a positive culture? You know, what are the frames that we could look at to create a healthy work culture versus do we really want to spend our time, we have the data and looking at a toxic culture and everything, and we get really good at everything that causes a toxic culture. We need to shift to how do we build that healthy culture and look at that data and create that environment. But Monica, would you like to say more about it?
No, I think that you answered the question. I really do think that the open-endedness and not assuming there's a problem to fix is probably, those were kind of aha moments for what you just said. So thank you.
Yeah. And sometimes, you know, the 80-20 rule, there's a lot of research out there and the science behind this. So like a high performing team, you need a 6-to-1 positivity to negative ratio. If you look at Barbara Fredrickson's work, it's a 3-to-1 positivity ratio when you're dealing with yourself and one other. So, oh, in relationship, if you're in a relationship, someone, Gottman's research is 5-to-1. So every one negative thing you say to your significant other, it's going to take you 5 positives to come out of that hole there. So Sherry and I've kind of landed on the 80-20 rule, the 4-to-1 being in that appreciative and that positive space. Emily asked questions about, can you give more examples of what are generative questions? Not only can I give more questions, in the booklet on page 7 are the generative questions so that you have what are generative questions you can ask yourself and other. And on page 8 of your booklet is examples of generative questions if you know you're trying to surface assumptions on page 8, or asking people about creating shared understanding or creating shared outcomes. So there are lots of questions on page 8 of your guidebook that we sent out. And there are also in your workbook on page 10 are questions from SOAR. There's so many different ways to ask a strength-based question. And the coaching slide is on page 11. So if you go to that guidebook that we shared with you, there are lots of examples there. And you can go to the website, www.cwh.today and go to the blog, and there's lots of ways to ask generative questions. And once you start practicing asking generative questions, it becomes very natural. It's just a real natural way to ask questions for people. So that's where you can get that, Emily and everybody. What if the person who we converse with is not honest or has the best intent? In Conversations Worth Having, we talk about below the line. Sometimes you walk away, and you'll say, you know, we're not in a good place. It doesn't matter what the conversation is. This is not healthy. And sometimes when you're in that destructive place, you need to walk away. And if you're really tuned in, and now we're talking emotional intelligence, you can tell that person when you're ready to have a literally conversation worth having about this, why don't we get together? But this conversation keeps spiraling downward. I don't know if that helps you out, Carol, but that's a tough one. That's a tough one to do. Sometimes you walk away from destruction. Okay, I'm just working my way through here. So Gina asked a question. What can you do to help? Is it Gina or Jenna? What can you do to help someone who has been below the line their entire life? I got two answers to that. If someone's been below the line their entire life, they might need clinical counseling, professional counseling outside of the scope of what I can do to help. And if you work with someone on your team that's been the negative Nelly on the team, if you consistently lead by example, the way you ask questions, you can actually over time begin to bring someone from that negative depreciative space to more positive and appreciative by your actions. And I have seen changes in my colleagues, not overnight, over time. Is it Gina or Jenna? Did I answer your question if you're still here?
No, Dr. Sarro, she's
Okay,
not
okay.
here.
All right, Luis, he asked a question. Do you ever find management that you're working with resistance to appreciative inquiry and SOAR methodologies compared to other approaches, and how do you handle it? That's a great question. So I'm not a salesperson. I never push this on anybody. So I look at appreciative inquiry as my operating system. So when I'm working with management, it's really, they begin to notice the way I frame and I ask questions. And I don't find them resistant to that. So think of appreciative inquiry. It's a way of being and how you enter into dialogue and discussions with people. And SOAR is a dialogical framework. So only twice in 25 years, 2 times, did I have management people who were not, they don't want to do this. Now, this is an organization development group here. If you look at the change handbook and there's 60 intervention methods, this might not be the right intervention for you. So the 2 times in 25 years, I've actually told the senior managers, you're not right to be using appreciative inquiry until you believe questions can change the world and the way you ask questions and interact. So sometimes it's you that understands if they're resistant. Don't try to push it on them, but tell them you'll be there when they're ready. That's a really great question. Somebody asked if you could do a video showing a step-by-step approach on how to use mind map using these techniques. I'm not sure if that person would like to unmute themselves. I'm not sure what you mean by that. It looks like it's another Jackie.
Hello, thank you so much for taking my question. I'm actually right now trying to create my own mind map to help guide myself in my career pathway. And I'm doing this as part of a project for one of my classes at Penn State. And I think these would be great techniques for me to help me think about myself correctly and where I want to go. But I'm sort of having trouble starting the mind map process, and I wondered if you have a video or if you could make a video that maybe takes a participant through the mind map creation using these SOAR techniques.
Yeah, so that's like a whole different presentation if I had another 45 minutes. So there's a presentation that I do. It's called SOAR, S-O-A-R, Soar into Your Potential with Purpose, Jackie. And thank you for asking the question. And the thing is for yourself, it's really important that you ask values, vision, mission questions. You know, we do this so much for organizations, but Jackie, what is your values, vision, mission, and purpose? And then looking at SOAR at the level of the self, what are the questions that you could ask at the level of the self? What are my capabilities? What are the opportunities I want to go after? What are my aspirations that I want and results? So you could just take what's in the booklet that I've given you, and if you look on pages 9 and 10, ask these questions to yourself. The only thing that isn't in this booklet that I would encourage you to ask yourself is on page 9. I actually wrote a poem. I wrote a poem in 2nd grade, and I wrote a poem a few years ago. But ask yourself, what is your vision? What is your mission? What do you want to do? Why are you doing it? What are your goals? You could literally take what we do to organizations, Jackie, and create a strategy for yourself. And then you could flip over and use the SOAR questions and coaching and SOAR, what's possible, and ask those questions to yourself. Does that kind of help?
Yes, thank you so much. I appreciate your answer.
In the Learning to SOAR book, we in chapter 6, we talk about how to use SOAR at the level of the self.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah, so Tricia, you asked a question, can SOAR be used when there is a need for an intervention where 2 departments have had deep-rooted conflict for many years? Oh, yes, and I've worked with some organizations that had some departments, and what we've done is we've come together to have a conversation about the department and what should be our operating values. And we start from a place of strengths, and we design the whole intervention as a retreat to create a set of values at the department level of how we're going to behave and treat each other, and how we're going to work together. So yeah, SOAR can be used when there is deep-rooted conflict for many years. And what we're going to be addressing is how are we going to work together moving forward. And Tricia asked, where can I get the booklet? I didn't receive it. They should be putting it in the chat for you, Tricia.
Yes, we are putting it again.
Yes. And then I'm looking in the Q&A. We've got a couple minutes left. Jeantel, I'm not sure if I pronounced your name right, but you asked a question about, do you have pre or post data or longitudinal data on the effectiveness? And I do, Jeantel. So what I can do is I can send an article to, it's an article that got in the Frontiers Journal where we looked at the SOAR elements. So I do have some research that I can show you. Does it measure and do what it's supposed to be doing? So I can send that article out after the presentation. And if they can get you the article to everybody, absolutely, we've got some research on this.
Yes, we can do that. There is a follow-up email that will be sent to all people who registered and attended. So just we can include the article that you'll be sharing with us along the guideline, the booklet,
Yes.
I mean.
Yes, so I'm really happy to share that article. And I just finished an article that'll be coming out next month in the Appreciative Inquiry Practitioner, and it's the origin story about how SOAR came and how it connects to appreciative inquiry. So that I have an article coming out next month on that as well.
Okay, and I think we like for the people who are still like have questions, or like they put the question under Q&A questions, like if you still like if you have something, like you can just directly send it to the speaker, or you can just email to us, to our email, because we have to respect the time, and I think this is very rich topic, and having Dr. Stavros, like it's a good opportunity that we have a lot of things to just share with her and just learn from her as well. But therefore, unfortunately, we have specific time and we need to respect the time, especially people in different time zones. And so thank you so much, Dr. Stavros. On behalf of our ODNC Workforce Education Program, we hope that you all enjoyed the session as we did. If we did not get your question, please send us an email or reach out directly to the presenter via an email. For the future webinar, we would like to hear your feedback on today's webinar. Please take the survey using the link in the chat box. Our next webinar is about making training deliberate, impactful, which will be presented by Dr. Mark Johnson on May 17th, 2024. And it will be the same timing, 12 to 1 p.m. Eastern timing. As you know, registration for all events are free and can be found in our website. You can also find us on our social media platforms such as Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, and Twitter. Again, thank you everyone for joining us today, and we hope to see you soon. Have a good day and good night to our guests from other time zones.